Hi, and welcome back to Brand New Little People, the podcast where we talk about all things early parenting with a particular focus on sleep and settling across the first few years. I'm your host, Dr. Fallon Cook, and I'm here with my colleague, Dr. Laura Conway. How are you going, Laura?
I'm good, thanks, Fallon. Just about staying warm in this cold weather. It's like being back in England. How are you coping in regional Australia?
Yeah, it's been really, really chilly, but like weirdly chilly, but also sunny lately, which is it sort of almost feels a bit like spring. But yeah, definitely it has gotten colder for sure. We've had a 2 week break because last weekend was the King's birthday long weekend in Victoria. So it feels very nice to just be sitting down to do this again, all refreshed. And I think we probably
Yes.
both needed the break. Did you have a nice long weekend?
Yeah, I did. I went away down to the beach, and it was lovely. Some bracing walks on the sand, and yeah,
Yeah.
really needed it. I think that we spend so many hours every week supporting clients and their families that I think all people who work in this field really have to take the time out to care for themselves as well sometimes. So I really feel refreshed and ready to jump back into things this week.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, 100%. There's something about, I actually love going to the beach in winter when it's freezing cold and there's wind and the waves are crashing. It's like, I find it very therapeutic. It's
Yeah,
really
yeah.
like, I don't know, it's just a great place to just let go of whatever, yeah, you've been carrying heavily from work. Yeah, it's awesome. I mostly was just renovating. Like I always
Yes.
am, painting and getting things set up. But I'm actually in my new office now, which is our new virtual sleep clinic. So for the handful of people
Amazing.
who actually watch this on YouTube, there aren't many of you, but you'll be able to see behind me my new office. And I think if I adjust my screen, yep, there's even a sleeping dog on the couch. There usually is around here.
Yes. Yeah, amazing. You put so much hard work into that renovation, Fallon. It's so nice to
Yeah.
finally see you in the virtual clinic and to see the artwork on the wall and the little bassinet in the background. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
beautiful. Well done.
It feels amazing to have a dedicated space, that's for sure. Yeah, I'm totally loving it. So it'll just mean we've got a great space too for filming lessons for Sombel members or just content on our social media channels. We do a lot of sort of snippets with tips and things like that. So yeah, it's going to be great to have a space for it. Yeah, so look, we were just trawling through all these questions, weren't we? There's been so
Yeah.
many questions come through because we have had that bit of a break. Um, and one of the recurrent themes is around naps. I think it's so often the case for parents that you're like, yes, I've got the naps working beautifully. And then all of a sudden, it's
Yes.
just, they're not working so well anymore. So I thought, Laura, why don't we talk about the signs that it's time to drop a nap? Because I think this can be really confusing for parents. You know, sometimes, some days you think, okay, they're ready. And then the next day you're like, oh, no, they're not.
Yes. Yeah.
Talk us through what are some of the signs you're telling parents to look out for?
So I tend to describe 4 signs to drop a nap. And your baby or toddler may show one of them, 2 of them, 3, or all 4. And we really want to think about those signs being present for at least a week to make sure that there isn't anything else affecting sleep. Because as we've spoken about often on this podcast, sleep is impacted by so many different variables. It is a really good idea to make sure that these signs that we're going to talk through have been present for at least a week, so that you can rule out sickness, developmental spurts, teething, any other factors that might actually just be causing a bit of a blip that will pass in sleep. The first sign I normally describe is how you may be going to pop your baby or toddler down for a nap that they previously went to sleep for quite quickly, and then it starts to take them a little bit longer to go to sleep for that nap. And, maybe it was 10 minutes, 15 minutes at most that they were taking to go to sleep. And now it's pushing out to 20 or 30 minutes, sometimes more. They really seem to be fighting one, all, or all of their naps. And that's a real red flag that maybe something is up. They might be needing a little bit longer awake during the day, and don't need to
Mm.
have quite so many naps.
Or they might sort of have that trouble settling at bedtime too, can't they? I see
Yes.
that sometimes they nap okay and then bedtime is starting to get really difficult.
Yes,
Mm.
that's right. So the sleep onset at bedtime really pushes out, and parents can describe that their naps that seem to be fine, but for some reason it's
Mm.
taking them ages to go to sleep at the start of the night. Other times, the start of the night is fine because your baby or toddler is consistently skipping that last nap of the day. And then parents are saying, oh my goodness, they're awake for so long in that lead up to bedtime that it's really hard to keep them awake. But they've refused their last nap of the day. And then they
Mm.
finally, lurch towards bedtime and they're absolutely exhausted. And then the sleep onset is quite quick. Um,
Mm.
so those are two signs, because we just mentioned that taking a long time to fall asleep at the beginning of the night, or starting to struggle to go to sleep for the naps, and sometimes skipping one of the naps. What other signs are there, Fallon?
Look, definitely we see them start to, they might have their naps are fine, bedtime's fine, but they're waking more often overnight.
Mm-hmm.
And that can mean that, their nights are just really fragmented. They fall asleep at bedtime, 45 minutes later, they're awake, and you're
Yes.
constantly trying to resettle them. So yeah, if the nights are fragmented with lots of brief wakes, that can be a sign. Or it could just be that they're having a few hours of good sleep and then they're wide awake for 1 or even up to 3 hours if
Mm-hmm.
they're having split nights or biphasic nights.
Mm,
Definitely if they're having the really long wake ups, that is such a clear sign that they're overdoing the day sleep.
yeah.
So that would be the third one to look out for. Um, and early waking for the day as well. If they're up super, super early and previously they were able to sleep in to a sort of reasonable time, but now they're, constantly waking up really early. That is such a common one. I just was looking at a Facebook post the other day actually where someone was talking about this saying, what do I do? They're up so, so early. And look, there are
Yeah.
definitely babies and toddlers that are just early risers, but if it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of come out of nowhere, it could be that, the day
Yeah.
sleep is a little bit too much. And sometimes it's not that you need to drop a nap, you might just need to trim down the length of each nap.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they're sort of the four things to look out for. So taking longer to fall asleep, refusing the final nap, or just being hard to get down for the final nap, waking more often overnight, and waking really early for the day.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, Laura, it's really if it's a collection of those signs for a week or more.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, we also want to be thinking about, how old is the baby or toddler? And
Yeah.
sometimes that influences whether or not you drop a nap or you trim the naps. I think there was a
Mm-hmm.
case, was it the last episode or maybe the one before, where the baby was maybe 9 or 10 months and seemed to really want to just have one massive nap in the middle of the day, but wasn't quite handling it. Maybe, I
Yes.
don't know if it was the podcast or just something in a client I saw. But in that case, it's just a little too young to move to just one
Mm-hmm.
nap. Typically would say try and do two shorter naps first,
Yeah.
for a
Yeah.
week or two, see how that goes. So yeah, be thinking about age. What we typically find is that they really should be dropping from 3 to 2 naps somewhere between 6 to 8 months.
Yeah.
There's always that window of variability, but
Mm-hmm.
if they're getting quite a bit past 6 months and they're still on 3 day naps and nights are really tricky or settling's really hard, that's the point at which I would be thinking about dropping to 2 naps. And that drop from 2 to 1 nap again has a really
Mm.
wide window.
Yeah.
Could be as early as, look, there is occasionally a 10 or 11-month-old who just seems super ready for it. But mostly it's from about 12 months to maybe 15 months or so
Yeah.
when they make that switch.
Yeah. And sometimes we have families who report their baby or toddler just absolutely loves their daytime sleep and really doesn't want to give it up, but the night times are just hellish.
Yeah.
And then we hear, oh, they're having two naps a day and they're both 2 hours each, and they're 15
Mm.
months old. And it's, well, um, we probably need to address that balance
Yeah.
of day sleep to nighttime sleep.
And it's so hard for families, isn't it? Because if your child is waking up a lot at night, they're starting the day on the back foot, they're going to be
Yeah.
more tired. So, of course, they want more naps. And of course, they do show all the tired signs and they are genuinely needing that sleep, but it's because the nights were so bad. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of parents are really frightened to deliberately try to reduce day sleep in order to
Mm-hmm.
push a bit more sleep into the nights because they're terrified of overtiredness. The
Yeah.
worst, I mean, overtiredness, it got so overhyped, didn't it? It has
Yeah,
done
it
so
did.
much damage. You really don't need to be so worried about it.
Yeah.
And we were talking earlier too, Laura, about, and I think we mentioned this in another podcast too. If your child is over the age of 3 and they're still having a day nap, and there is anything at all wrong with their nights, whether it's hard to settle them, they're waking up a lot, or early rising, the nap has got to go.
Yeah.
There are very few children who can hold on to a day nap after the age of 3 and still have good nights.
Mm-hmm.
So do keep that in mind as well if you've got a 3-year-old.
Yeah, yeah. And know that when you do make a change to the number of naps that your baby or toddler is having during the day, that it will take them around about a week to get used to a new daily rhythm. So sometimes what we hear from parents is that they have made the change, dropped from 4 naps down to 3 or 2 to 1, whatever it is that the change that they're making, because they've seen a combination of those signs we've described, and the nighttime sleep doesn't improve straight away. And then they think, oh, well, it hasn't worked. And now my baby or toddler is just really, really tired and grumpy during the day, and the nights haven't improved. So it's a really important thing to persist and give it about a week. Give your baby chance to adapt to the new daily rhythm. And you will find that as the week goes on, they will start to function much better. They will then start to have longer sleeps overnight, or start to take less time to go to sleep at the start of the night, whatever the issue was that you had seen that led you to the conclusion that they were ready to reduce their day sleep. And then that will mean that they will get a run of better night's sleeps under their belt, which means that they're going to be able to tolerate fewer naps during the day much better. And you will then find after a week or so that things will really start to improve. The nights will be better, the days will be better, and you'll be back on track until they're ready to drop the next nap.
Yes. Yeah. And I often say to families in the clinic, just expect that when you change that daily rhythm, the first few days are going to be horrible, and night sleep might even be worse than it normally is. And I say to parents, that's normal. Don't panic. Just go, yep, this is what Fallon said was going to happen. And that usually helps them cope with that change enough. And then they're sort of 4 days in and they go, okay, yeah, I get it now. It's starting to kind of click. So yeah, it does take a bit of bravery from parents, definitely. But it's well worth it, because once they make that switch, you've then got hopefully a few months ahead of you that are settled until it's time to make that switch again.
Yeah.
And I think that, that advice applies to quite a few of the families who have emailed in this week, Laura. Should we start going through those?
Yeah, let's do that. So we have Cassie, who's emailed in an update on her baby, who's now 6.5 months old. And she has, in the last week, dropped down to 2 naps a day. And Cassie has found that her night sleep seems to be getting back on track. She had written that she was waking quite a number of times overnight when she'd previously had fewer wakes and was only waking up for feeds. Then the wakes had ramped back up again, which is one of those signs we talked through. Cassie went back in and had a look at the unique sleep needs chapter and has moved to a 2-nap schedule. And things are improving, which is great. So Cassie asks, when transitioning to a new nap schedule, is it okay to have an earlier bedtime, for example, 6:30 rather than her usual 7 p.m., especially if she can still sleep through to her usual wake-up time? What do you think, Fallon?
Yeah, I'd say in those first few days on the new schedule, it's really common that you try and get them through to bedtime and they just can't quite make it. Just do your best. Get as close to it as you can. then the next day try again. It's not that you're going to give up and say, okay, well, 6:30 is always the bedtime now, because sometimes they can do that for a little bit, and then you notice, hang on, they're waking up more at night again. We're
Yeah.
offering a little bit too much opportunity to just sleep overnight. So yeah, temporarily, yes, that's okay, but always be aiming to push it closer to that bedtime of 7 p.m. that you're aiming for.
Yeah. And Cassie also asks, on days when naps don't go to plan, for example, if her baby only has a short nap, she asks, are you better to follow your baby's usual awake time or to push for their usual bedtime? For example, Cassie says the sweet spot for her baby seems to be 4 hours awake before bed, which sounds about right, Fallon, for a baby who's 6.5 months old.
Mm.
And particularly knowing what we know about Cassie's baby. Would I follow this, or would I push to 6:30 or 7, regardless of the wake up time? And really, it's the same advice as what you've just answered, Fallon, isn't it? That in that
Yeah.
first few days of switching to a new schedule, just do your best. We know that
Yeah.
sleep isn't linear. Even when your baby has adapted to a new schedule, sleep is never going to be identical from one day to the next, because that's just not the way sleep is. So there will be days where one nap might be shorter than usual. And on those days, it may be that you do bring bedtime earlier that night, for example. But just keep an eye on it, I would be suggesting, because if you find
Yeah.
that the your baby is actually coping quite well with slightly less daytime sleep, so always having maybe one longer nap and one short nap, and you had been aiming for that short nap to be a longer one, if your baby is demonstrating that that's all they want and they're waking up happy, then stop fighting it. And then
Yeah.
maybe you do change bedtime. But if
Yeah.
you find that more often than not they're having two longer naps, then I'd be aiming for that later bedtime.
Yeah. Yeah. And I always say to families, bedtime and wake up time are the kind of signposts for the circadian rhythm. So aim to keep them pretty consistent. There might be, 30 minutes variability on the days when you need it. But in particular, I would keep that wake up time. I think that's where things often go awry, is when parents say, oh, they had this awful night and we just thought, oh, we'll just sleep in an extra hour today. And then it just keeps snowballing from there.
Yeah.
The next night's also tricky and they sleep in again. Yeah, but it sounds like you're doing a really wonderful job, Cassie, and I hope that advice helps. Laura, Michaela has emailed in about increasing her toddler's nighttime sleep duration. She says at 16 months old, her daughter has around about an 11-hour sleep need per day. She naps twice a day for about 2 hours total sleep, and she's having about 9 hours of sleep overnight. Michaela says they would like to increase her night sleep duration, but in the past, when they've tried to bring bedtime earlier, she'll just wake up very early or for really long periods of time overnight, or just lots and lots overnight.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
I know that pain. It's not very fun. She says the 9-hour overnight sleep has resulted in uninterrupted night sleep, which has been really needed, and we're afraid to mess with it. So what Michaela's describing is that they've got a really good balance of day and night sleep there. When she's offered 9 hours overnight, she sleeps really well. But Michaela says, we're wondering if it's possible to increase her night sleep by 1 hour or so if we cut this from the day naps. Or can some babies with low sleep needs simply not sleep for longer stretches at night?
Yeah, interesting question, Michaela. Look, there are some babies who, for one reason or another, seem to have a cap, a maximum amount that they will sleep in one stretch. And sometimes we do see that, particularly in lower sleep needs babies, that they will only do 9 or 10 hours overnight, no matter what we do. However, having said that, given that your baby is now 16 months old, so she's actually a toddler now rather than a baby, I would be thinking that it's probably time to move her to just one nap a day, because she's right down the, if we think about that time frame that we spoke about earlier, somewhere between 12 months and 15, 16 months that toddlers tend to drop down to the one nap. Michaela, your baby's right at the upper end of that. And I would be thinking about moving her to just the one nap. And then you might find that with higher sleep pressure, although she's previously been unable to sleep for longer than 9 hours overnight, she might actually now do longer stretches overnight and won't start to have the wakes overnight and the or early starts for the day. Particularly if you look at perhaps when you move her to that one nap, giving her maybe just an hour and a half for that sleep in the middle of the day. And then you've got maybe 9.5, even possibly you could see if she will do 10 overnight. Possibly not, but it's not beyond the realms of possibility. What do you think, Fallon?
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. You definitely want to, as you push the two naps together, going from 2 hours total day sleep to an hour and a half total day sleep is not a massive change. So it's a pretty gentle change. We're only reducing the total day sleep very slightly. I think that's really good advice. Just, like we said earlier, stick to it for a week. Know that the first few days will probably be horrible because she'll be really cranky and her circadian rhythm's trying to figure out what's going on. But yes, to answer the question, definitely if we reduce the day sleep by around about, an hour, or in this instance, maybe starting with 30 minutes, it's really likely that she will add it to the nights, but it could take a few days to a week for her to do that.
Yeah.
Good luck, Michaela.
Yeah. All right, and we have a email from Fiona. So Fiona wrote a lovely email, and she starts by saying, "Oh, I'd like to hug you both and thank you for creating Sombel. It's a fabulous resource for very tired and overwhelmed parents." That's so
thank
lovely.
you.
Thank you, Fiona. She says, I did a generic wake windows approach with my eldest and drove myself mad with tracking, trying to figure out how to fix her sleep like it was a maths equation. I'd tell myself, if I just keep her awake another 8 minutes, then she'll sleep perfectly through the night.
Oh, you poor thing, Fiona.
Yeah, she says, oh gosh, I never really solved the equation until I relaxed a bit and actually looked at my baby, looking for signs of tiredness, created a bedtime routine, and trusted my instincts. Well done. So Fiona goes on to describe how with her second born, she went with the flow, which worked well at first. But then at around 4 months, she found herself co-sleeping with her baby, and they both had very interrupted sleep. She used Sombel to help him adjust to settling in his cot, which he now does very well, preferring to settle alone without Fiona in the room. So Fiona's first question is around how he falls asleep. If she tries to pat him, he'll get very upset, but if she leaves his room, he has a little grizzle and then falls asleep. She wonders if this is cry it out and could it damage their bond. Do you want to jump in and answer that, Fallon, before we go on to the second question?
I'm so glad you asked this question, Fiona, because I think for a lot of families, they're really, really worried about damaging the bond that they have with their baby. And there's so much confusion about what cry it out actually is. Cry it out means to say goodnight to your baby at bedtime and just not go back in until the morning. That's the actual definition of what cry it out is. It's just leaving them completely alone all night. That's not what you're doing. It's definitely not what you're doing. What you're doing, Fiona, is you've looked at what your baby's preferences are. You've looked to them for cues on what's going to help them settle down for sleep. And for some babies, if they've got a parent in their room when they're trying to fall asleep, they're hideous. They get really cranky. It's a lot of parents wouldn't believe this, but there really are babies who are just furiously mad if they can see you and you're not kind of doing what they would like you to do. And the minute that parent steps out the door, the babies calm down and go to sleep. Yeah. So, like I said, this is not every baby, but Fiona has recognized in her baby that actually he needs some space, and when I get out of his way, he can put himself off to sleep pretty quickly. He might be having a bit of a grizzle, but grizzling is actually a strategy that a lot of babies and toddlers use to self-settle. They have a bit of a grizzle and a grumble. It's a bit like adults at the end of the day when you're like, oh, I'm so tired, I just need to go to bed. It's the same kind of noises. So you've done nothing to damage your bond with him. In fact, you've been wonderful because you have identified what he needs to fall asleep quickly and easily, and you've respected that. So I think that's absolutely perfectly fine. yeah, well done, Fiona. I think that's brilliant.
Yeah, me too. Well done. It's absolutely not cry out. Yeah, and some babies will do that sound as well. They'll grizzle initially, and then they just make that sound, like
Yeah.
rhythmic kind of vocal stimming almost as they're
Yeah,
going
it
off to
is.
sleep.
They
Yeah.
like the sound, the rhythmicity of their own sounds. And look, while we've touched on this topic, I think it's worth jumping in to say that one of the questions we get a lot from people who haven't joined Sunbelt, they email us and say, is there any cry it out? Is there cry it out in your programs? No, there's absolutely not. It's
No.
so, I mean, it's weird to even say that it's rare that you'd need to do cry it out, because I don't think I've really come across a circumstance where that was necessary to leave a baby completely alone all night and not respond. In Sunbelt, we expect parents to be there and to provide frequent reassurance to their little ones when they're in the cot. That might mean that you do something very gradual, where you're gradually reducing how much hands-on support you're giving. But typically we say stay in the room and be really predictable and reassuring with your responses. But in our modification section, it does suggest for situations like Fiona's, if you notice your baby settles much more easily when you leave the room, that's totally fine to do, because you're responding to what they actually need.
Yeah.
So I hope that clears things up for anyone who might be listening in and thinking, what's this program about? Yeah, I hope that
Yeah.
helps.
Yeah, I think, and also just knowing that if your baby is crying, it's your baby crying at bedtime is not cry it out. So if
Yeah.
you are settling your baby in their cot or bassinet and they are crying and you are responding to them, be it patting them all the way off to sleep, giving them short bursts of being in their cot without your hands on them, or whatever approach it is that you're trying. And there are many, many, many in the Sunbelt program. If you're responding to them and they are crying, then that's okay. Some babies will just cry because that's their main way of communicating. And it's not the same
Yeah.
as an adult crying. It's different. It's their main communication means.
Yeah.
And it's not cry it out when you're responding to them nice and calmly and predictably, and shushing and humming or rocking them with your hands or patting them in the cot. I think that somewhere in the ether, the idea of any kind of crying in a baby being wrong has taken root. And then it just worries parents, because, of course, all of the parents who are listening to this podcast, whether they're Sunbelt members or not, are truly committed to having a lovely, rich, secure attachment with their babies. And they want to do the best for their babies. And when then they're hearing from outside sources that if your baby cries at all, that suggests that there is damage happening to the attachment. It's very hard and discombobulating for parents. And then when that all gets labeled up into this cry it out, anything that involves a baby crying is cry it out and therefore wrong. It can be very hard to
Yes.
kind of keep making changes when that's happening.
Well, what's happened with that whole movement is that it's pathologized really normal baby behavior. Babies are supposed to cry out for their parents when they're unsure about a situation, because then we step in as parents and say, this is okay. Yeah, like, I love that you've spoken about this before, Laura. You often say when they're crying, it's like they're asking a question, like, is this okay? I'm not used to being in my cot, if that's what you're working on. And they're looking to you for a response. And if you're there calm, relaxed, and you're patting and shushing and you're telling them you love them and you're giving them lots of support, then you're answering that question with, yes, this is a safe place and you're okay here. And that actually builds strong, secure attachment, because your child is learning that I can depend on my parent. If I'm feeling unsure, I can depend on them to respond to me. We've really gone down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, we have. Well, sorry, we haven't even got to the second part of Fiona's question. Sorry, Fiona. They knew.
Anyway, that's okay. It's our podcast. We can do what we want.
So let's have a look at Fiona's second question. So she says she wonders if her baby needs a little more day sleep. She describes a daily rhythm that fits his unique sleep needs really well. And she mentions that if she gives him more day sleep, he's wakeful overnight. Yet when she caps his day sleep to improve his nights, he can be cranky during the day. She wonders if it's just taking time for him to adjust, or should she add in more day sleep?
Yeah. Oh, it's a good question. And it's always a bit of a wobbly line. And as a parent, it might take you a while to figure out, exactly what the perfect amount of day sleep is. I always say to parents, stick to the schedule so that the nights are really, really good and have really good nights for 1 or 2 weeks. Then think, okay, I'm going to add in 15 minutes more. Maybe you're going to give a little bit more day sleep, or maybe you're going to let them sleep in a little bit longer in the morning. But you're just adding 15 minutes extra opportunity to sleep. So they might not take it, but you're giving them the opportunity at one particular time each day, not varying
Mm-hmm.
every day, just one particular time. And if after a week they're taking that 15 minutes, they're happier, their mood has improved and their nights are still wonderful, great, you're on the right
Mm-hmm.
track. But if you've really got to do that for a week though to find out if it works for them. But there can often be that blurry line where parents say, look, they are a bit ratty during the daytime, but then their nights are so wonderful and we can cope with it. It's fine.
Mm-hmm.
You might make a decision like that too. You can have a bit of an experiment, but I would say keep the nights going really well and then add something in rather than doing something a little bit different every day.
Yeah. Yep. Good advice.
Mm.
All right. Shall we move on to Lucinda's question now, Fallon?
Yeah. Yep. Do you want me to read that one out?
Yeah.
All right. So Lucinda describes how her 14-month-old is waking at night, sometimes for hours at a time.
Gosh.
Oh, ouch.
Yeah.
She says they recently reintroduced night feeds during a particularly rough patch. And now he's very insistent that he still needs to keep those night feeds. She says they aren't sure if he is ready for just one day nap because they tried a few weeks ago and it went terribly. He has a 12-hour sleep need and he settles for both naps fairly easily. She says he can settle independently but has been needing more cuddles and rocking recently. Lucinda wonders what to tackle first. Lucinda wonders what to tackle first. Chewing up my words. Is it the number of naps, the night feeds, the settling, or the bed sharing? What do you think, Laura?
Right, 14 months old. We know that he can self-settle and he's up for hours and you've had to reintroduce a night feed. I would be moving to one nap.
100%.
100%.
He's really ready.
Yeah, he's
and it
really
can change
ready.
so quickly, can't it? Like it might have been a few weeks ago that you tried and he wasn't ready, but it's been a few weeks and it can change really fast. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would move him to one nap, which means that then the those long overnight wakes are likely to reduce in duration, which then is going to make it easier for you to stick to not offering a feed overnight. Depending on how many feeds you're offering him, Lucinda, and whether it's bottle or breast, I would probably spend a few days just reducing the volume if it's a bottle and reducing the number of feeds. And if it's breastfeeding, unlatching him a few minutes before the end of a feed or just feeding him on one side. And then make the leap to dropping the feeds altogether, settle him to sleep however you can. And if that means continuing to co-sleep whilst you're doing that, do so. And then move on to the settling and stopping the bed sharing. And that would be the order that I would suggest. What do you think, Fallon?
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And I think just for listeners, keep in mind that if Lucinda had a very little baby, we'd be saying stop the co-sleeping first. So make the situation safe and then work on the other things. But because she's got a toddler, it's a little bit different and there's not so much of a safety concern, which means that you can do things like sometimes it is easier to drop the feed, but still have the option of cuddling them off to sleep and then tackle the bed sharing as the final step.
Yeah, if your toddler just goes nuts when you're trying to just cuddle them to sleep and keep them in the bed and they're trying to get, particularly if your child's breastfed, then you would want to, it might just be easier for you to stop the bed sharing at the same time that you drop the night feeds, but it really depends on whether it's bottles or breast.
And for so many breastfeeding parents, it works so well for the non-breastfeeding parent to go and do the settling with the toddler in another room. So getting them set up in their own sleep space, And just having the breastfeeding parent out of sight and out of mind can make a
Yeah.
very big difference too.
Mm.
Yeah. All right. Well, we also had Susanna, who says, we have a 4-month-old boy who happily self settles during the day for 4 or 5 30-minute cat naps in his cot,
Hmm.
but who still wakes anywhere from every 20 minutes to 2 hours at night. He has
Hmm.
a sleep need of 12 hours per day. Susanna says, we started with the supported accelerated approach and have had some improvement. They've had a 4-hour stretch, but then he got sick within the first week and required a lot of cuddles to sleep, and he slept with Susanna in her bed.
Mm-hmm.
This was followed by vaccinations and severe eczema triggered from a
Oh,
food allergy. So they've really been through the ringer.
yeah.
Susanna says now 3 weeks later, we are experiencing 7 to 8 wakes over a 9 to 10 hour night.
Mm.
She says the length of the overnight period depends on if he needed the 5th cat nap or not. She says we've tried to reduce to 4 cat naps, but he literally cannot keep his eyes open without it some days.
Mm.
She also describes that he screams so intensely when he stirs at night. And she's not even sure if he's awake because his eyes are never open. But it is so intense that he'll lose his voice, and she feels she can't settle him in the cot anymore. That's really hard when they're in that
Yeah.
kind of light sleep and screaming, and poor Susanna.
Yes.
Um,
Oh.
so Susanna describes that the screaming is so intense that after trying to settle him in the cot for a few minutes, she picks him up to settle him. She
Mm.
describes how he never screams with the same intensity during the day for naps.
Mm-hmm.
He tends to settle within about 2 minutes for his naps.
Mm-hmm.
And she also says that they've been to the GP many, many times, and he is medically healthy. I'm really stumbling over my words today. So Susanna is confused. Why is he settling so well for day naps, but having so much distress overnight? So even with a hands-on support at night, he's
Mm.
screaming and really, really upset. That sounds so tough, Susanna. Laura, what are your thoughts on this
Yeah.
case?
Yeah. As you were reading it, I was thinking, well, first of all, we need to make sure that he's medically okay, that
Yeah.
he's healthy. So, and of course, Susanna, you've followed up with the GP many times, and he's healthy. So, look, my heart goes out to you. It sounds like you have had such a rough run, and he's only 4 months old. So you're still in the trenches. You're out of that very little baby phase, but it sounds like you kind of came out of that and then fell into this severe eczema, the vaccinations, the sickness. So you haven't yet had a stretch of being able to see your baby outside of that very little baby phase without the sickness and so forth confounding things. So I'm not surprised also, given how frequently your poor little baby is awake in the night, that he is so exhausted during the day. And you're
Mm,
finding that trying to drop down from 5 naps to 4 is really hard because he is struggling to keep his eyes open when you do drop that 5th cat nap. But I think that's really going to be the key here, Susanna,
mm,
to like we were speaking about earlier, once he's better and the eczema's under control, he has got over the vaccinations and he's no longer sick, then just saying, all right, we are now going to move him to a 4-nap schedule and
mm,
try and space those 4 naps across the day. Think about in the evening how to put some supports around yourself, because he will be a bit cranky initially because the previous nights will have been rough. So think
mm.
about, often we say think about putting a baby into water, like a bath or a shower, but given that he's got eczema, you probably are following advice about minimizing how many baths he has just whilst his skin heals. So think about if there's company that you can invite around, or
Mm.
whether you, depending where you live, Susanna, if it's not freezing cold in Victoria, think about going out for walks in the garden or down the street to look at cars going past, or to pick a leaf from a tree, or maybe don't pick it off a tree, but pick a leaf up from the ground so that he can feel it. and just do everything you can to help distract him, so that he starts
Mm,
to have a bit of a longer stretch awake before bedtime at the start of the night. And then you might find that those wakes every 20 minutes stop happening
mm,
quite so much, and he'll start to have those longer stretches again. I think it's ace that you have had an experience of 1 4 hour stretch of sleep. And of course, he's very
mm,
little, so he will need to feed overnight. Many babies at this age do need to have feeds overnight, so we wouldn't be expecting him to be sleeping the whole night through. But yeah, waking up every 20 minutes is really excessive and would be really, really
yeah.
challenging, Susanna. What do you think,
Yeah.
Fallon?
I think this is a really good example of where nights can be so challenging and so fragmented that, yeah, they settle quickly and easily for the day naps, and parents think, well, they obviously need the naps. They settle easily for them. They're tired enough for them. But it's one of those cases where we just have to reduce the day sleep and push a bit more sleep into the nighttime. So I would say really stick to that 12 hours. Look at the daily rhythm charts and see if there's one in there that works for you. Like Laura said, lots of distractions to help keep him awake. You might even plan to make the switch over a weekend where you've got a partner around, if you have a partner, or if you can invite some friends around to help. All hands on deck while you make that change. And for what it's worth, I think it can really shock parents how noisy their babies can be in light sleep. If his eyes are closed and he's making a whole lot of noise and yet might even be crying, there's still a really good chance that he is in the lighter stages of sleep. And parents think, well, it's obviously terrible quality sleep because they seem really upset when they're in those lighter stages. But that's not the case. That light sleep is actually really important. We do it for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And all babies need to still get the lighter stages of sleep. So try not to worry. I know it's a hard thing to hear. Try not to worry
Mm-hmm.
when you're having to put up with such challenging nights. It will resolve. It won't last forever. He should start to get a bit quieter at night time and be a little bit more settled, especially once the sleep pressure is a little bit higher at night time. So hang in there, Susanna. It is a tricky age.
Mm-hmm.
Chances are in another month it'll be entirely different.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully, with that advice to reduce the day sleep, you really start to see things come together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm.
All right, and we have our final email that we're going to cover today, which is from Marge. Marge describes how her 4.5-month-old son has a 13-hour sleep need. He wakes every 2.5 hours overnight, insistent that he needs to feed. Marge follows the feed, play, sleep, repeat pattern, but fears it's causing him to want to feed overnight. She describes his daily rhythm, which has some variability depending on whether he has 1 or 2 sleep cycles in a row. She says she's happy to be awake as long as she says he's happy to be awake as long as he's being carried. She's been using the quick fade approach. She's heard conflicting advice, but feels he should be able to do 4 or more hours of sleep at night in a stretch. And she wonders, is that realistic for a 4.5-month-old to sleep for 4 hours in a stretch at night? Should she take him off the current daily rhythm to redo his sleep diary? And could feeding too often in the day cause a bellyache overnight that causes him to then want to comfort feed during the night? Oh, quite a few questions
Mm.
there. Fallon,
Yeah,
which one
yeah.
did you
There's a
want to
bit
take first?
bit to unpack. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's start with: is it realistic for a 4.5-month-old to sleep for 4 hours in a stretch at night? Yeah, definitely. If they've got high enough sleep pressure, I'd expect them to probably start their night with, a 3 to 4 hour stretch. Not
Mm-hmm.
unreasonable at all. And in fact, if they weren't starting their night with a few hours in a row of good deep sleep, I'd be thinking there's a bit too much day sleep happening.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, you can expect a 4.5-month-old to be able to get some 4 hour stretches. What's that statistic? It's that by 12 weeks of age, 80% of babies are having 1 5 hour stretch of sleep at night time.
Mm.
So, just to give you a bit of a comparison there. So, definitely possible by 4.5 months. So then to the next question, should she take him off the current daily rhythm to redo his sleep diary? I would say no. I would stick to the daily rhythm. And I'd actually be looking at, yeah, I would stick to the daily rhythm that you've got. Check that it is suitable for 13 hours sleep need.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like there's a little bit of variability in the nap, so it might be worth looking at making sure those naps stay a bit more consistent,
Mm-hmm.
if you can. And if you're thinking that his sleep needs have dropped, then track the sleep, but still stick to that 13-hour schedule while you're tracking the sleep. And if he's waking up a lot and not meeting 13 hours, well, that's fine. You're just going to see what the actual total
Mm-hmm.
sleep duration has dropped to. So, yeah, I wouldn't be taking him off the daily rhythm to redo the sleep diary. Just
Mm-hmm.
stick with what you're doing. And then that last question is a really interesting one. Could
Mm.
feeding too often in the day cause a bellyache overnight that causes him to then want comfort feeds during the night? Look, I would say no. My thinking is no. I mean, it'd be interesting to ask maybe a lactation consultant.
Mm.
But milk is like, it's digested pretty quickly. So it's not like, you have your Christmas dinner and you go to bed and you're absolutely stuffed to the top and you wake up because you're thinking, gosh, I've got a bellyache. Milk is pretty easily digestible, whether it's breast milk or formula. They're both pretty easily digestible.
Mm.
Um, and Marge also mentioned in that email, didn't she, that she's following a feed, play, sleep, repeat pattern,
Mm-hmm.
and she's worried that it's causing him to want to feed more overnight. And that's interesting too. When you do feed, play, sleep, repeat across the day, sometimes in little babies, they just need an extra feed every now and then. And we do
Mm-hmm.
want to offer them that if they're showing hunger signs. That's why I always say apply that rhythm very flexibly. It's just a
Mm-hmm.
rough pattern to follow. Try not to be too rigid. If he's showing some hunger signs, then I would offer in the extra feed during the
Mm-hmm.
daytime.
Yeah.
So we've kind of followed a few different trains of thought there. But what would you add to that, Laura?
Yeah, I would just be checking the contents of his nappy as well. So just if you're feeling that maybe he has a bellyache, just double check that there aren't any strange poos happening. There's no mucus, blood, or frothiness in the poos that might suggest an irritated gut. And following up with your GP or your health nurse if you do notice any of those things. And yeah, if you need to add in an extra feed. So if it's a feed, play, feed, a book, and then sleep during the day for one of those wake windows, then that's okay. For often around 6 months is when you can start to introduce solids, but your nurse might suggest introducing solids earlier. They sometimes do for some babies, depending on what's happening with their behavior and their hunger signs, etc., during the day. So I'd follow up with your health nurse to just double check if there's anything that you need to do differently in relation to your unique baby. Just keep on going, Marge. I think it sounds like you've got a really good grasp of what is happening with his sleep. Log his sleep again if you think it might have changed, like Fallon has suggested. Then make sure that you then look at the most relevant daily rhythm chart in Sombel. And
Yeah.
you'll
And
get
with
back
those
on track.
with the night wakes, I'd be inclined to think it's probably more to do with low sleep pressure than tummy aches. So, yeah, I think I'd definitely be thinking about that daily rhythm as a first step. Thank you so much to all the wonderful parents who have sent in these great questions. It's so interesting that with so many of the answers, it really comes down to something to do with naps and maybe dropping a nap or shortening a nap. So hopefully if you're listening in, you're having some trouble with naps, this episode has given you a few things to think about. Just some news. So on the day we record this, it's Monday the 17th of June. Tomorrow night, Tuesday the 18th, I'm doing the Toddler Sleep and Settling webinar for the Raising Children's Network. It's completely free to register. So if you've got a toddler or a baby who will one day turn into a toddler, it's a great one to listen into because we go through things surrounding personality and temperament and how that would play into how you might tackle sleep or settling difficulties in a toddler. It's my favorite webinar to do. I really do look forward to it. So go along and register register for that. I'll try to remember to put a link in the show notes. We also did the baby sleep webinar only a month or so ago.
Mm-hmm.
And that's recently become available to watch again at no charge on the Raising Children's Network website. So we'll pop the link in the show notes. There's a couple of freebies there. You're very welcome to join in on. If you're having, more intense struggles and you really want some support with sleep and settling, please go and check out Sunbell. Have a look, see if it's for you, especially since I recently did a massive website upgrade. It took me a lot of time, and it looks so pretty now that I want you to all go and have a look at it and marvel at how beautiful our website is now. And if you notice anything not working, let me know. But yeah, we're here to support you if you need some help. There's coaching calls for Sunbell members available later this week even. So if you're a Sunbell member and you want to have a chat through a particular problem, just reach out and you can book a coaching call through the link on the dashboard. Amazing. What a great start to the week, Laura. And we'll be back again next week for another episode.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Bye-bye.